Al Capone. From humble beginnings to notorious crime boss. Early life and background. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born on January 17, 1899, in Brooklyn, New York, to Italian immigrant parents, Gabrielle and Teresa Capone. His father was a barber, and his mother was a seamstress, both striving for a better life in America. The Capone family lived in a working-class neighborhood, surrounded by other immigrant families trying to make ends meet. As a child, Capone showed signs of intelligence but struggled with discipline. He attended a strict Catholic school, where he was known for his temper and defiant attitude. At the age of 14, he was expelled after striking a teacher, marking the end of his formal education. With few prospects and the need to support himself, Capone turned to the streets, where he became involved with local gangs. Entry into organized crime. Capone's first exposure to organized crime came when he joined the Five Points Gang, a notorious New York street gang led by Johnny Torrio. Under Torrio's mentorship, Capone learned the inner workings of the criminal underworld, including racketeering, gambling, and loan sharking. He also worked as a bouncer at the Harvard Inn, a Coney Island bar owned by gangster Frankie Yale. During a fight at the bar, Capone received a razor slash across his cheek, leaving him with the infamous scar that earned him the nickname Scarface. Capone's reputation as a tough and loyal enforcer grew, and by the early 1920s, Johnny Torrio invited him to Chicago to work for the city's crime syndicate. This move marked the beginning of Capone's rise to power. Rise to power in Chicago. Upon arriving in Chicago, Capone worked as Torrio's right-hand man, helping to oversee illegal operations such as gambling dens, brothels, and bootlegging businesses. The Prohibition era, 1920 to 1933, had created a lucrative market for illicit alcohol, and Capone quickly saw an opportunity to expand the gang's influence. In 1925, after Torrio survived an assassination attempt, he decided to retire and handed over control of the Chicago outfit to Capone. At just 26 years old, Capone became one of the most powerful crime bosses in America. Unlike his predecessors, Capone did not shy away from publicity. He frequently appeared in newspapers, portraying himself as a businessman and benefactor to the poor. Criminal empire and violence. Capone's empire thrived on illegal alcohol distribution, bribery, extortion, and protection rackets. He controlled Chicago's political and law enforcement systems, ensuring that his operations remained untouched. However, his reign was marked by extreme violence as he eliminated rivals in brutal fashion. One of the most infamous incidents under Capone's rule was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre on February 14, 1929. In an effort to wipe out his main rival, George Bugs Moran, Capone ordered a hit on Moran's gang. Disguised as police officers, Capone's men lined up 7 of Moran's associates against a wall and executed them with machine guns. The massacre shocked the nation and cemented Capone's reputation as a ruthless crime lord. Despite his criminal activities, Capone was seen by some as a modern-day Robin Hood. He opened soup kitchens during the Great Depression and made donations to local charities, attempting to maintain a positive public image. Downfall and imprisonment. As Capone's power grew, so did the government's efforts to bring him down. While law enforcement struggled to pin violent crimes on him due to lack of evidence and witness intimidation, federal agents, led by Eliot Ness and the Untouchables, focused on Capone's financial records. In 1931, Capone was finally arrested and charged with tax evasion. After a highly publicized trial, he was convicted and sentenced to 11 years in prison. He was initially held at Atlanta Penitentiary before being transferred to Alcatraz in 1934, where he was isolated from his criminal network. While in prison, Capone's health deteriorated due to syphilis, which he had contracted years earlier. He was released in 1939 due to his declining condition and spent his remaining years in Florida, living in relative obscurity. Legacy. Al Capone died on January 25, 1947, at the age of 48. His legacy as one of the most infamous gangsters in American history remains unmatched. He transformed organized crime into a highly structured and profitable enterprise, setting a precedent for future crime syndicates. Despite his criminal activities, his name continues to be romanticized in popular culture, appearing in films, books, and television shows. Capone's story serves as a cautionary tale of power, corruption, and the inevitable downfall of those who operate outside the law. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1, 1949, in Rio Negro, Antioquia, Colombia. He was the third of 7 children in a modest family. His father, Abel de Jesus Escobar Echeverri, was a farmer, while his mother, Hermilde Gaviria, was an elementary school teacher. Escobar grew up in the nearby town of Envigado, where he showed signs of ambition from a young age. Even as a child, he was known for his cunning and entrepreneurial mindset, often engaging in small hustles such as selling stolen tombstones, fake diplomas, and smuggled cigarettes. Escobar's early life was marked by a mix of poverty and a drive to succeed at any cost. During his teenage years, he became involved in petty crimes, including car theft and street scams. In the 1970s, as Colombia became a hub for illegal drugs, particularly marijuana and cocaine, Escobar saw an opportunity for immense wealth. He gradually transitioned from small-scale criminal activities to becoming a key figure in the growing drug trade. By the mid-1970s, Escobar established himself in the cocaine business, capitalizing on the increasing demand for the drug in the United States. He founded the Medellin cartel, which quickly became one of the most powerful and violent drug cartels in history. Escobar was known for his ruthless tactics, eliminating rivals and bribing officials to secure his dominance. His empire expanded rapidly, with cocaine being smuggled into the U.S. through a variety of methods, including hidden compartments in planes and submarines. At the peak of his power in the 1980s, Escobar was one of the wealthiest men in the world, amassing an estimated net worth of $30 billion. He owned luxurious estates, private zoos, and even a personal island. However, his fortune came at a great cost, as he ordered the deaths of thousands of people, including government officials, police officers, journalists, and innocent civilians caught in the crossfire of his operations. Escobar's influence extended beyond the drug trade. He sought political power as well. In 1982, he was elected as an alternate member of Colombia's Congress, using his wealth to gain political legitimacy. However, his political aspirations were short-lived as his ties to the drug trade were exposed, leading to his expulsion from Congress. This marked the beginning of his all-out war against the Colombian government. As the Colombian authorities and the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, intensified their efforts to capture Escobar, he resorted to extreme measures, including orchestrating bombings, assassinations, and even the bombing of Avianca Flight 203 in 1989, killing all 107 people on board. His most infamous act of violence was the 1985 attack on the Colombian Supreme Court by the M19 guerrilla group, allegedly financed by Escobar, in which nearly half of the justices were killed. Despite his brutality, Escobar was seen as a Robin Hood figure by some in Colombia, particularly in the poor neighborhoods of Medellin. He invested in social projects, building housing, schools, and sports facilities for the underprivileged. This dual image of Escobar as both a ruthless criminal and a benefactor created a complex legacy that persists to this day. As international pressure mounted, the Colombian government negotiated with Escobar, leading to his self-imposed imprisonment in 1991 in a luxurious prison he built himself, known as La Cathedral. However, when authorities attempted to transfer him to a more secure facility in 1992, he escaped, sparking one of the largest manhunts in history. For over a year, Escobar remained on the run, using his vast network of loyalists to evade capture. On December 2, 1993, a Colombian Special Forces unit, assisted by U.S. intelligence, located Escobar in Medellin. In a dramatic rooftop chase, he was shot and killed, bringing an end to his reign of terror. Pablo Escobar's impact on Colombia and the world remains profound. His rise to power and violent downfall left a lasting mark on the global war on drugs, shaping policies and enforcement strategies that continue to this day. Despite his death, the remnants of his empire and the lessons from his reign continue to influence discussions on crime, corruption, and drug policy worldwide. Don Gotti. From childhood to crime boss. Early life and background. John Joseph Gotti Jr. was born on October 27, 1940, in the South Bronx, New York City. He was the fifth of 13 children born to John Gotti Sr. and Filomena Gotti, Italian immigrants who struggled financially. The family eventually moved to Brooklyn, settling in the East New York neighborhood, an area known for its high crime rates. Growing up in poverty, Gotti quickly became drawn to the street life. He and his brothers often got into trouble, engaging in petty crimes to make money. By his early teens, he had joined a local gang affiliated with the mafia. He attended Franklin K. Lane High School but dropped out at the age of 16, preferring to spend his time on the streets. This decision marked the beginning of his deepening involvement in organized crime. Introduction to organized crime. Gotti's early criminal activities included robbery, hijacking, and car theft. His natural charisma and tough demeanor caught the attention of the Gambino crime family, one of the most powerful mafia organizations in the country. He became an enforcer for Carmen Fatico, a captain in the Gambino family, and quickly gained a reputation for his willingness to use violence. During the 1960s, Gotti specialized in truck hijackings at John F. Kennedy International Airport. This illegal operation was extremely lucrative, and his success earned him respect within the mafia. However, his rising profile also led to law enforcement scrutiny. In 1968, he was arrested for hijacking a truck filled with merchandise and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Rise within the Gambino family. After his release in 1971, Gotti resumed working for the Gambino family, proving his loyalty and efficiency. He was assigned to the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, a social club that served as a front for the family's operations. By the mid-1970s, he had become a made man, an official member of the mafia, cementing his status within the organization. Gotti's first major act of violence within the family occurred in 1973 when he was ordered to kill James McBratney, an Irish-American gangster who had kidnapped and murdered a Gambino associate. Gotti and 2 other men carried out the hit in a Staten Island bar, but he was later arrested and sentenced to 4 years in prison. His sentence was reduced to 2 years after a plea deal. Upon his release, he resumed his work under Aniello Dellacroce, the Gambino family underboss. Dellacroce became Gotti's mentor, teaching him the inner workings of the mafia and reinforcing the importance of loyalty and discretion. The Paul Castellano hit and seizing power. By the 1980s, the Gambino family was the most powerful crime syndicate in the United States, but internal tensions were brewing. Paul Castellano, the family boss, was increasingly unpopular among some members, including Gotti. Castellano's business-first approach and perceived arrogance alienated many, particularly those loyal to Dellacroce. When Dellacroce died in 1985, Gotti saw an opportunity to seize control. Without Dellacroce's protection, Castellano became vulnerable. On December 16, 1985, Castellano and his underboss, Thomas Bellotti, were assassinated outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. Gotti was widely believed to have orchestrated the hit, though he was never convicted for it. Following Castellano's murder, Gotti was quickly named boss of the Gambino family. His rise to power was swift and brutal, solidifying his reputation as a fearless and strategic leader. The Dapper Don era. As head of the Gambino family, Gotti adopted a flashy, high-profile lifestyle, often wearing expensive suits and making public appearances. Unlike traditional mafia bosses who operated in the shadows, he embraced media attention, earning the nickname the Dapper Don. His charm and confidence made him a media sensation, but his real power lay in his control over the Gambino empire. Under his leadership, the family was involved in extortion, loan sharking, illegal gambling, drug trafficking, and labor racketeering. His ability to evade prosecution earned him another nickname, the Teflon Don, as charges against him failed to stick due to witness intimidation and jury tampering. Downfall and conviction. Despite his ability to escape legal consequences for years, Gotti's downfall began in the early 1990s. Federal authorities, determined to bring him down, launched an extensive investigation into his activities. His underboss, Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, eventually turned informant in exchange for a reduced sentence. Gravano's testimony provided enough evidence to convict Gotti. In 1992, Gotti was found guilty of murder, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and other charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was sent to the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, where he spent the remainder of his life in solitary confinement. Final years and legacy. While in prison, Gotti's health deteriorated. He was diagnosed with throat cancer in 1998 and underwent surgery, but the disease returned. He died on June 10, 2002, at the age of 61. John Gotti remains one of the most infamous mobsters in American history. His flamboyant lifestyle, ruthless tactics, and ability to manipulate the media made him a legendary figure in organized crime. Despite his criminal activities, he has been romanticized in books, movies, and television shows, cementing his legacy as one of the most notorious mafia bosses of all time. Dawood Ibrahim. From street hustler to global crime lord. Early life and background. Dawood Ibrahim Kasker was born on December 26, 1955, in the coastal town of Ratnagiri, Maharashtra, India. He was raised in the Dongri neighborhood of Mumbai, an area known for its high crime rates and deep underworld connections. His father, Ibrahim Kasker, was a police constable, while his mother, Amina, was a homemaker. Despite coming from a law enforcement background, Dawood was drawn to the world of crime from an early age. Growing up in a crowded, lower-middle-class neighborhood, Dawood witnessed the workings of Mumbai's criminal underbelly firsthand. As a teenager, he became involved in street gangs, particularly the Haji Mastan and Kareem Lala gangs, which controlled smuggling and illegal trade in the city. He dropped out of school and began engaging in petty crimes such as theft and extortion, slowly making a name for himself as a street-smart hustler with sharp instincts. Rise in the Mumbai underworld. By the late 1970s, Dawood had formed his own gang, the D Company, which would later become one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. His early operations focused on gold smuggling, bootlegging, and extortion, taking advantage of Mumbai's black market economy. Dawood's strategic alliances and ruthless methods allowed him to eliminate rival gangs, expanding his influence rapidly. During the 1980s, Dawood's gang took control of Mumbai's underworld after a violent power struggle with other criminal factions. His ability to navigate the political and law enforcement landscape made him an untouchable figure in the city's organized crime scene. Corrupt police officers and politicians were often on his payroll, allowing his operations to flourish without significant interference. The 1993 Mumbai bombings and international notoriety. Dawood's criminal empire took a darker turn in the early 1990s when he was allegedly involved in orchestrating the 1993 Mumbai bombings. These coordinated attacks, which left over 250 people dead and hundreds injured, were said to be in retaliation for the destruction of the Babri Masjid in 1992. The bombings marked a shift from Dawood being a local crime boss to being considered a global terrorist. Following the attacks, Dawood fled India and reportedly took refuge in Pakistan, although the Pakistani government has consistently denied harboring him. He was designated as a global terrorist by the United States and has remained on India's most wanted list ever since. His close ties with terrorist organizations like Lashkar-e-Taiba and alleged involvement in funding extremist activities further cemented his reputation as a transnational criminal figure. Expansion of the D Company and criminal empire. Despite being on the run, Dawood continued to expand his criminal empire. His operations diversified beyond smuggling and extortion into drug trafficking, arms dealing, and money laundering. The D Company established a strong presence in Dubai, Karachi, and other international hubs, using sophisticated networks to control illicit activities worldwide. By the early 2000s, Dawood's syndicate was deeply entrenched in South Asia's organized crime scene, with reported links to drug cartels in Afghanistan and Colombia. His influence stretched across continents, making him one of the most wanted criminals globally. Reports suggest that his network was also involved in match fixing and illegal betting in cricket, particularly in the Indian Premier League, IPL, further increasing his wealth and power. Efforts to capture Dawood. Despite multiple international efforts to capture him, Dawood Ibrahim has managed to evade arrest for decades. India has repeatedly pressured Pakistan to extradite him, but no significant action has been taken. Interpol has issued red corner notices against him, and intelligence agencies from multiple countries continue to track his movements. Dawood remains a highly elusive figure, allegedly residing in Karachi under heavy protection. Reports indicate that he has altered his appearance and changed locations frequently to avoid detection. His deep financial networks and high-level political connections have made it nearly impossible for authorities to bring him to justice. Legacy and ongoing threat. Dawood Ibrahim's legacy is one of fear, violence, and global crime. His transformation from a street hustler in Mumbai to an internationally recognized crime lord highlights his cunning, ambition, and ruthlessness. While his influence in India's underworld may have diminished over time, his global criminal network remains a significant threat. Governments and intelligence agencies continue their pursuit of Dawood, but his story remains unfinished. Whether he will ever be captured or whether his syndicate will continue to operate in the shadows remains a question for the future. Regardless, Dawood Ibrahim remains one of the most notorious criminal figures in modern history, a symbol of how organized crime can transcend borders and operate beyond the reach of law enforcement. Joaquin Chapo Guzman is one of the most infamous drug lords in modern history. As the leader of the Sinaloa cartel, he built a multi-billion-dollar drug empire and became a symbol of both ruthless criminality and legendary escape artistry. His journey from a poor rural childhood to becoming one of the most powerful criminals in the world is filled with violence, ambition, and cunning. Joaquin Archivaldo Guzman Lara was born on April 4, 1957, in La Tuna, a small village in the municipality of Badiraguado, Sinaloa, Mexico. His family was extremely poor, and he grew up in a household with limited resources. His father, Emilio Guzman Bustos, was a cattle rancher, but he was also rumored to be involved in the opium trade, a common business in the region. His mother, Maria Consuelo Lara Perez, played a strong role in his upbringing and was known to be a devout woman. From an early age, Guzman experienced hardship and brutality. His father was reportedly abusive, often beating him and his siblings. He was forced to work in the fields as a child, cultivating marijuana and poppies, an early introduction to the drug trade that would define his life. He only attended school until about third grade before dropping out to support his family. As a teenager, Guzman began working with local drug traffickers, gaining experience in the industry. He started by growing and selling marijuana and poppies, following in his father's footsteps. However, his ambitions quickly outgrew his small village. By the late 1970s, he had aligned himself with major drug traffickers, including Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, one of Mexico's most powerful drug lords and the founder of the Guadalajara cartel. Under Gallardo's mentorship, Guzman became involved in large-scale drug transportation. His sharp mind and brutal tactics earned him a reputation as a reliable enforcer. He managed shipments of cocaine from Colombia to the United States, ensuring that drug loads arrived safely and punishing those who failed to deliver. His efficiency and willingness to use violence helped him rise quickly within the cartel. In 1989, Gallardo was arrested, and the Guadalajara cartel fractured into smaller groups. Guzman took advantage of the power vacuum and established the Sinaloa cartel along with other key figures. The cartel became one of the most dominant criminal organizations in the world, specializing in the trafficking of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana. One of Guzman's biggest strengths was his ability to move drugs efficiently across borders. He pioneered the use of underground tunnels to smuggle drugs into the United States, bypassing traditional law enforcement measures. These tunnels, some of which had ventilation and lighting systems, became a signature method of the Sinaloa cartel's operations. El Chapo's cartel was known for extreme violence. He ordered assassinations, mass executions, and public displays of brutality to maintain power. His ability to instill fear and his willingness to kill those who opposed him made him one of the most feared men in the criminal underworld. He also engaged in bribery, corrupting law enforcement, government officials, and even military personnel to protect his operations. His notoriety increased after his first arrest in 1993. He was captured in Guatemala and extradited to Mexico, where he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for drug trafficking and murder. However, in 2001, he pulled off a dramatic escape from Puente Grande, a maximum security prison, by reportedly hiding in a laundry cart. This escape cemented his legendary status in the criminal world. Following his escape, Guzman resumed control of the Sinaloa cartel and expanded its operations. He continued to dominate the drug trade, shipping tons of narcotics into the United States and laundering billions of dollars. His cartel became the most powerful in Mexico, surpassing rivals like the Tijuana and Juarez cartels. Despite his efforts to evade capture, Guzman was arrested again in 2014. This time, he was taken to the high-security Altiplano prison. However, in 2015, he made another daring escape, this time through a sophisticated tunnel that led directly from his cell to a house nearly a mile away. The tunnel had ventilation, lighting, and a motorcycle on tracks, allowing for a quick getaway. His freedom was short-lived. In January 2016, after months of pursuit, he was captured again in Las Macas, Sinaloa. This time, Mexico agreed to extradite him to the United States, where he faced multiple charges, including drug trafficking, money laundering, and murder. In 2019, he was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently serving his sentence at ADX Florence, a supermax prison in Colorado, known as the most secure prison in the United States. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's rise from a poor farmer to a feared drug kingpin is a testament to his intelligence, brutality, and cunning. His legacy remains controversial. Some in Mexico see him as a folk hero who provided jobs and money to impoverished regions, while others view him as a ruthless criminal who brought destruction and death. Regardless, his impact on the global drug trade and law enforcement tactics will be studied for years to come. Charles "Lucky" Luciano was one of the most influential figures in the history of organized crime in the United States. He played a pivotal role in shaping the modern American mafia, establishing the National Crime Syndicate, and restructuring criminal enterprises into a more efficient and organized system. His rise from a poor immigrant to the most powerful crime boss in America is a story of ambition, strategy, and ruthlessness. Luciano was born Salvatore Lucania on November 24, 1897, in Lercara Fritti, Sicily, Italy. His family immigrated to the United States in 1906, settling in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, a neighborhood notorious for its poverty and crime. As a young boy, Luciano struggled in school and was drawn to the streets, where he quickly learned how to survive by engaging in petty crimes. By the time he was a teenager, he had dropped out of school and formed a gang of his own, extorting money from younger boys for protection. At the age of 18, Luciano was already involved in serious criminal activities, including drug trafficking. He became associated with local gangsters and began working for Arnold Rothstein, a major figure in the New York underworld. Rothstein, known for his role in fixing the 1919 World Series, took Luciano under his wing and taught him the business side of organized crime. Luciano learned how to run illegal gambling operations, smuggle alcohol during Prohibition, and manage various rackets. During the 1920s, Luciano aligned himself with the Sicilian and Italian-American mafia, but also built relationships with Jewish and Irish gangsters, including Meyer Lansky and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. He believed that the old ways of the mafia, which were based on strict loyalty to Sicilian traditions, were outdated and limited the potential for growth. He wanted to create a more modern and business-oriented criminal enterprise. Luciano's big opportunity came in the late 1920s and early 1930s when the power struggle within the mafia reached a peak. At the time, the Italian mafia in New York was dominated by two factions: the Mustache Petes, old-school bosses who were deeply traditional, and the younger, more business-minded gangsters like Luciano. One of the leading bosses, Joe Masseria, took Luciano under his wing, but Luciano secretly plotted against him. In 1931, Luciano orchestrated the assassination of Masseria with the help of his allies, including Lansky and Siegel. With Masseria out of the way, he then turned on Masseria's rival, Salvatore Maranzano, who had declared himself the boss of bosses. Luciano saw this title as outdated and had Maranzano assassinated as well. This power move allowed Luciano to take control of the mafia in New York and establish a new order. Luciano restructured organized crime in the United States, eliminating the old boss of bosses system and replacing it with the Commission, a governing body that consisted of the heads of the major crime families. The Commission allowed disputes to be settled without unnecessary violence and ensured that the mafia operated more like a corporation rather than a loose collection of warring factions. This move solidified Luciano's power and allowed for a more coordinated and profitable operation. Throughout the 1930s, Luciano expanded his criminal empire, controlling illegal gambling, drug trafficking, extortion, and prostitution. His wealth and influence grew tremendously, making him one of the most powerful figures in the underworld. However, his success also attracted the attention of law enforcement. In 1936, New York District Attorney Thomas E. Dewey led a crackdown on organized crime, and Luciano was arrested and charged with running a massive prostitution ring. Despite his denials, Luciano was convicted and sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison. However, even behind bars, he maintained control over the mafia and continued to exert influence over criminal activities. During World War II, the U.S. government made a secret deal with Luciano, known as Operation Underworld. In exchange for his help in securing the New York docks against possible Axis sabotage and assisting the Allied invasion of Sicily, Luciano's sentence was commuted, and he was deported to Italy in 1946. Despite being exiled, Luciano continued to be involved in organized crime, particularly in international drug trafficking. He spent time in Havana, Cuba, attempting to rebuild his empire, but U.S. authorities pressured the Cuban government to expel him. He eventually settled in Naples, Italy, where he lived under constant surveillance, but remained a key figure in the global drug trade. Luciano's health began to decline in the late 1950s, and on January 26, 1962, he died of a heart attack at Naples International Airport. His legacy, however, lived on. He had transformed the mafia from a fragmented and violent network into a highly organized and profitable enterprise. His establishment of the commission ensured that the mafia operated smoothly for decades, and his business model influenced criminal organizations around the world. Charles "Lucky" Luciano remains one of the most significant figures in the history of organized crime. His strategic mind, willingness to adapt, and ability to form alliances helped shape the modern underworld. While he was a ruthless and feared criminal, his influence on the mafia's structure and operations is undeniable, leaving a lasting impact on organized crime in the United States and beyond. Meyer Lansky. From immigrant to mob boss. Meyer Lansky was one of the most influential figures in organized crime in the 20th century, known for his intelligence, business acumen, and ability to operate under the radar of law enforcement. Often referred to as the mob's accountant, Lansky played a key role in the rise of the American mafia, particularly through his connections with various crime families and his deep involvement in the management of their financial operations. Lansky was born on July 4, 1902, in Grodno, Russian Empire, now in Belarus, to a Jewish family. His birth name was Meyer Sokolinsky. His family immigrated to the United States when he was just a young child, settling in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, New York City, an area known for its dense immigrant population and rampant poverty. The family faced difficult circumstances, and Lansky's early life was marked by hardship. Growing up in the tough streets of New York, Lansky was introduced to the world of crime at an early age. He attended school briefly but quickly dropped out to help his family financially. It was in the Lower East Side that Lansky met future crime associates, including Charles "Lucky" Luciano, Benjamin "Bugsy" Siegel, and other Jewish and Italian-American gangsters who would go on to shape the American underworld. Lansky's natural intelligence, combined with his street smarts, earned him the respect of his peers and helped him rise through the ranks of the burgeoning organized crime scene. Lansky's first venture into criminal activity came through the operation of illegal gambling rackets. In the early 1920s, Lansky and his associates began controlling a network of illegal bookmaking and gambling operations. He quickly established himself as a financial genius who could manage large amounts of money and make operations run efficiently. His knowledge of how to move and launder money became a cornerstone of his involvement in the mafia. By the time Prohibition began in 1920, Lansky had become heavily involved in the alcohol smuggling business. He played a crucial role in organizing the transport of bootlegged liquor into the United States, establishing connections with various criminal groups, including those run by Luciano and other influential figures in the mafia. Lansky's operations were highly profitable, and his financial expertise allowed him to ensure that these ventures ran smoothly and avoided attention from law enforcement. During the 1930s, Lansky's reputation as a financial mastermind continued to grow, particularly as the mafia became more structured. Lansky helped Luciano establish the National Crime Syndicate, a loose coalition of crime families from around the country that allowed them to work together rather than against one another. The syndicate became a powerful force in organized crime, controlling a range of illicit businesses, from gambling to narcotics trafficking. Lansky's ability to manage and protect the financial interests of the syndicate allowed him to gain a prominent role in this new criminal enterprise. As a key advisor to Luciano and other crime bosses, Lansky was instrumental in setting up and overseeing the mafia's financial operations. His role as the financial brains of the organization was solidified through his skill in moving large sums of money across borders and laundering it through legitimate businesses. His savvy in business deals and investments made him extremely wealthy, and he became a highly respected figure in both the criminal and legitimate worlds. Lansky's involvement in the creation of Las Vegas as a hub of organized crime is one of his most well-known achievements. In the 1940s, he played a critical role in financing and overseeing the construction of casinos in the city. He partnered with other mafia figures, including Siegel and Frank Costello, to establish control over the casino industry. These casinos were not only legitimate businesses, but also served as fronts for the laundering of money from illicit activities. Despite his growing empire, Lansky always avoided the limelight. Unlike many other mobsters who sought attention, Lansky was known for his ability to operate quietly and efficiently. His low profile allowed him to evade the intense scrutiny faced by many of his associates, which enabled him to continue to operate with relative impunity. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Lansky's influence continued to spread. He maintained a stronghold in the gambling world, particularly in Havana, Cuba, before Fidel Castro's revolution. He was heavily involved in organizing and running casinos in Cuba, making enormous profits before they were shut down by the Cuban government. Lansky's international connections allowed him to continue expanding his operations, and he became a key player in the global underworld. However, as the years went by, law enforcement began to focus more on Lansky's activities. In the 1970s, the U.S. government started to investigate Lansky for tax evasion and other crimes. Though he was never convicted of major criminal charges in the United States, his wealth and connections made him a marked man. Lansky eventually moved to Israel, where he was arrested in the 1970s for attempting to immigrate under false pretenses. Despite his strong ties to organized crime, Lansky was not extradited to the United States, and he spent his final years in relative obscurity. Meyer Lansky died on January 15, 1983 in Miami Beach, Florida, at the age of 80. His legacy remains one of the most powerful and influential in the world of organized crime. As one of the architects of the modern American mafia, Lansky helped create a criminal empire that spanned continents and generations, and his financial expertise and involvement in major criminal operations made him a key figure in the mafia's golden age. Though he avoided the violence and drama that defined many of his contemporaries, Lansky's influence continues to be felt in both the criminal world and popular culture. Frank Lucas. From poverty to infamy, Frank Lucas, one of the most notorious drug traffickers in American history, rose from humble beginnings to become a key figure in the heroin trade. His criminal career was marked by a combination of ruthlessness, strategic planning, and a deep understanding of the narcotics business, making him one of the most feared and respected figures in the world of organized crime. Lucas's story is one of dramatic transformation, from a poor child in rural North Carolina to a powerful kingpin in Harlem. Lucas was born on September 9, 1930, in La Grange, North Carolina, the son of a poor farming family. His early life was steeped in hardship and poverty. The youngest of several children, Lucas grew up in a racially segregated America during the Great Depression. The family struggled to make ends meet, and Lucas's father, a sharecropper, had little to offer in the way of education or opportunity. At a young age, Lucas was exposed to the harsh realities of life and learned quickly how to survive in a world where resources were scarce. At the age of 13, after his father's death, Lucas moved to Harlem, New York, to live with his uncle. Harlem, at the time, was a vibrant and growing epicenter of African American culture, but it was also home to a thriving underworld of crime. Lucas's early years in Harlem were marked by a strong desire to make something of himself, and he quickly adapted to the street life. Like many young men in Harlem, he became involved in petty crime, working for local criminals and gradually building relationships with influential figures in the world of organized crime. In his early 20s, Lucas began working for one of Harlem's most powerful drug traffickers, Bumpy Johnson. Johnson, a well-known figure in the Harlem underworld, became a mentor to Lucas and taught him the ins and outs of the narcotics business. Lucas learned how to operate a drug distribution network, manage the logistics of moving heroin, and keep a low profile while making enormous profits. Under Johnson's tutelage, Lucas developed the skills that would later help him rise to the top of the drug trade. However, after Johnson's death in 1968, Lucas saw an opportunity to take control of the heroin trade in Harlem. At the time, the heroin market in the United States was dominated by Italian and French suppliers who controlled the flow of the drug into the country. Lucas, however, had a bold idea. He decided to cut out the middlemen and deal directly with heroin producers in Southeast Asia. Using his connections with local figures in the military, he was able to strike a deal with the producers in the Golden Triangle, a region where Laos, Thailand, and Myanmar meet. Through his connections, Lucas was able to import heroin directly from Southeast Asia, bypassing the traditional drug cartels and dramatically reducing the cost of the drug. This allowed him to flood the streets of Harlem with high-quality heroin at a fraction of the price his competitors were charging. His operation was incredibly efficient, and within a short period, Lucas became one of the most powerful drug dealers in the United States. Lucas's success in the drug trade was not just due to his access to cheap heroin. It was also a result of his unique approach to business. Unlike many other drug dealers, Lucas operated with a high degree of organization and secrecy. He was known for his tight security, using a network of trusted associates to manage his operations and protect his business from law enforcement and rival criminals. He also understood the importance of loyalty and kept a small but dedicated group of employees who were fiercely loyal to him. At the height of his power, Lucas controlled a heroin empire that stretched from Harlem to cities across the United States. His operation was highly profitable, and he lived a life of luxury, buying expensive cars, jewelry, and real estate. He became known for his extravagant lifestyle, but he also maintained a low profile, preferring to work from behind the scenes rather than seeking attention or fame. However, despite his careful planning and caution, Lucas's empire eventually began to unravel. In the mid-1970s, law enforcement began to close in on him. The police, along with the FBI, had been investigating his operation for years but had struggled to gather enough evidence to take him down. Lucas's downfall came in 1975 when he was arrested and charged with conspiracy to distribute heroin. His arrest was part of a larger crackdown on drug trafficking, and authorities were determined to bring him to justice. In order to avoid a lengthy prison sentence, Lucas made a deal with the government. He agreed to cooperate with the authorities and testify against his former associates in exchange for a reduced sentence. His cooperation led to the conviction of many of his former allies and associates, and he was eventually sentenced to 70 years in prison. However, Lucas served only 8 years before being released on parole in 1991. After his release from prison, Lucas lived a quieter life, attempting to distance himself from his criminal past. He occasionally made public appearances, reflecting on his rise and fall, and he was the subject of several documentaries and books. In 2007, a Hollywood film, American Gangster, was released, loosely based on Lucas's life. The film, starring Denzel Washington as Lucas, helped cement his place in the annals of criminal history. Frank Lucas died on May 30, 2019, at the age of 88. His life story is a testament to the dangerous allure of power and wealth, but also to the consequences of a life built on crime. From his beginnings as a poor boy in North Carolina to becoming one of the most notorious drug kingpins in American history, Lucas's rise and fall remain a compelling tale of ambition, ruthlessness, and survival. Salvatore Riina. From childhood to mafia boss. Salvatore Riina, one of the most feared and ruthless mafia bosses in history, played a key role in shaping the violent and power-hungry nature of the Sicilian mafia, also known as Cosa Nostra. His criminal activities, reign of terror, and ultimate capture made him one of the most notorious figures in the world of organized crime. Known as Toto Riina, his rise from humble beginnings to the pinnacle of mafia power is a chilling tale of ambition, cruelty, and unchecked violence. Riina was born on November 16, 1930, in the small rural town of Corleone, Sicily. The Corleone region would later gain infamy for producing some of the most notorious figures in mafia history, but Riina's early life was marked by poverty and hardship. His family, like many in Sicily, lived in a constant state of financial instability. His father, a poor farmer, struggled to provide for the family, and Riina grew up in a community where violence, crime, and social exclusion were part of the fabric of daily life. As a child, Riina was often subjected to the harshness of rural Sicily, where survival often depended on aligning with or supporting powerful figures in the local mafia. By the age of 15, Riina's family had suffered significant hardship. The early years of his life shaped his worldview and set him on a path toward the mafia. Sicily's mafia, especially in towns like Corleone, was a way of life. For many, joining the mafia was seen as the only route to power, wealth, and protection from the law. As a young man, Riina found his way into the local mafia network, aligning himself with powerful figures and building connections that would serve him well later in life. His rise within the mafia was swift, and by his early 20s, Riina had already become involved in organized crime, carrying out assignments for local mafia families. Riina's violent nature and lack of hesitation to eliminate rivals quickly earned him respect and fear. Known for his ruthlessness, Riina was not one to shy away from using extreme measures to achieve his goals, a characteristic that would later define his leadership style. In the 1950s, Riina's activities began to attract the attention of the higher-ups in the mafia. He worked closely with other local mafia figures, consolidating power and building a reputation for his cold-blooded approach to criminal enterprise. His nickname Toto became synonymous with terror, and he was often entrusted with the most dangerous and crucial tasks. Riina's rise to power in the Sicilian mafia was marked by brutal tactics, including bombings, assassinations, and intimidation. In the 1960s, Riina became an influential member of the mafia's leadership structure, closely associated with the Corleonesi faction of Cosa Nostra. This faction was led by Luciano Leggio, and it quickly became one of the most powerful groups in the Sicilian mafia. Riina aligned himself with Leggio and other key figures in the faction, including Bernardo Provenzano, forming a tight-knit and highly effective leadership team. Together, they engineered a violent strategy to eliminate rivals and dominate the Sicilian criminal underworld. By the late 1970s, Riina had become the de facto leader of the Corleonesi faction, consolidating power within Cosa Nostra. His rise to the top was not without violence, as he orchestrated a series of brutal killings aimed at eliminating rival mafia bosses. This period marked the beginning of Riina's notorious reign of terror, which would last for decades. Under his leadership, the Corleonesi faction embarked on a campaign of violence aimed at wiping out rival mafia families and expanding their control over various criminal enterprises, including drug trafficking, extortion, and money laundering. One of Riina's most infamous acts was his decision to declare war on the Italian state and law enforcement. This decision led to a wave of assassinations and attacks on judges, police officers, and politicians. The most notable of these was the murder of two prominent anti-mafia judges, Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, in 1992. These killings shocked Italy and the world, sparking outrage and increasing efforts by law enforcement to dismantle the Sicilian mafia. However, Riina's violent methods were not just directed at law enforcement. They also extended to anyone who dared challenge his authority or the mafia's power. The brutality of Riina's leadership earned him the title of the Beast among his enemies. His ability to stay one step ahead of law enforcement and the government authorities was a testament to his cunning and ruthlessness. Riena's network of loyal supporters ensured that his empire ran smoothly, despite the constant threat of arrest or betrayal. By the early 1990s, however, Riena's reign began to unravel. Law enforcement in Italy had launched a massive crackdown on the mafia, and many of Riena's associates were arrested or killed. Despite this, Riina continued to operate in the shadows, evading capture through a combination of hiding and relying on his network of mafia allies. However, in 1993, after more than 20 years on the run, Riina was finally arrested in Palermo, Sicily, after a dramatic operation by the Italian police. His capture was a turning point in the battle against the mafia, marking the beginning of the decline of Cosa Nostra's dominance in Sicily. Salvatore Riina's trial was lengthy, but in 1996, he was convicted of numerous crimes, including the murders of several judges, law enforcement officers, and rivals. He was sentenced to life in prison for his role in organizing and carrying out these atrocities. Despite his conviction, Riina continued to maintain his influence over the mafia, and he remained a symbol of the violence and corruption that plagued Sicily for decades. Salvatore Riina died on November 17, 2017, in prison after spending more than 20 years incarcerated. His death marked the end of an era for the Sicilian mafia, but his legacy remains one of bloodshed, terror, and a relentless pursuit of power. Riina's story serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the brutal tactics employed by those seeking control in the criminal underworld. From a humble and violent childhood to becoming one of the most feared mafia bosses in history, Salvatore Riina's life was defined by brutality, cunning, and an unwavering desire for power. Griselda Blanco. From poverty to drug queenpin, Griselda Blanco, often referred to as the cocaine godmother, was one of the most influential and notorious figures in the drug trade during the 1970s and 1980s. Rising from the harsh streets of Colombia and the ghettos of New York City, Blanco went on to establish a cocaine trafficking empire that spanned continents and made her one of the wealthiest and most feared women in organized crime history. Her story is a stark example of the way violence, cunning, and ambition can intertwine in the pursuit of power and wealth. Blanco was born on February 15, 1943, in Cartagena, Colombia, though she was raised in the slums of the outskirts of Bogotá. Her childhood was marked by poverty, violence, and neglect. Blanco's mother, who struggled to care for her family, abandoned her when she was very young, and Blanco was raised on the streets, learning to survive through petty crime. It was here that she honed her skills in manipulation and violence, traits that would later define her criminal career. Blanco's early life was a testament to the harsh realities of the Colombian underworld, where women were often forced into illicit activities to survive. At the age of 14, Blanco was arrested for the first time for stealing. Her teenage years were plagued with run-ins with the law, but she showed little remorse for her actions. Instead, Blanco learned how to use her beauty and charm to manipulate men, a skill she would later use to dominate the male-dominated drug world. She quickly became involved with the wrong crowd, associating with criminals and drug dealers who operated in the darker corners of Colombia. By the time she was in her late teens, Blanco had formed connections that would catapult her into the upper echelons of the cocaine trade. In the 1970s, Blanco moved to the United States, settling in New York City. The city was teeming with opportunities for organized crime, and Blanco quickly integrated herself into the burgeoning drug scene. By the mid-1970s, Blanco was trafficking small quantities of heroin, but it wasn't until she saw the potential profits in cocaine that her criminal empire truly took shape. The cocaine trade was flourishing, and Blanco recognized that the demand for the drug in the United States was skyrocketing. She quickly began to organize smuggling operations that brought cocaine from Colombia into Florida and the rest of the United States. Blanco's business acumen and connections in Colombia allowed her to establish a highly efficient smuggling route that went from the Colombian coca fields to the streets of Miami, where the drug was distributed to dealers across the country. Her success was built on the notion of controlling the cocaine supply chain from production to distribution. She created a network of couriers, drivers, and pilots who would transport the drug, often using inventive methods like hiding cocaine in clothing or packaging it in food products. Blanco's ability to orchestrate these large-scale operations made her a force to be reckoned with. By the late 1970s, Blanco's operation was booming. She became the leading figure in the Miami drug trade, with her influence extending to the highest levels of the Colombian cartel and other international drug traffickers. Blanco's control over the distribution of cocaine made her immensely wealthy, and her lavish lifestyle reflected her success. She bought mansions, luxury cars, and expensive jewelry, and she was frequently seen in the company of high-profile figures in both the criminal underworld and society at large. However, her empire was built on bloodshed, and Blanco maintained strict control over her operations with brutal force. One of the most notorious aspects of Blanco's reign was her penchant for violence. Unlike other drug lords who sought to maintain a low profile, Blanco was known for her ruthlessness and willingness to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to her business. Rival drug dealers, law enforcement officers, and even family members were all targets of Blanco's wrath. She employed hitmen to carry out executions, often in public and with little regard for the consequences. Blanco's violent methods earned her a reputation as one of the most feared and dangerous figures in the drug world. During the early 1980s, Blanco's empire reached its peak. She was responsible for smuggling hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cocaine into the United States every year, making her one of the wealthiest women in the world. Blanco's network operated in major cities like Miami, New York, and Los Angeles, and her business expanded into various criminal enterprises, including money laundering and arms trafficking. Despite her power, Blanco's downfall was inevitable as law enforcement began to close in on her. In the mid-1980s, Blanco's reign started to unravel. She became a target of both law enforcement and rival drug dealers. After several years of investigations, Blanco was arrested in 1985 and charged with drug trafficking, murder, and other crimes. The authorities were able to build a case against her using wiretaps, undercover agents, and testimony from former associates. Blanco was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, she continued to run her operations from behind bars, maintaining influence over her empire even while incarcerated. In 2004, Blanco was released from prison after serving 19 years, largely due to her age and deteriorating health. She was deported back to Colombia, where she lived a more low-key life for the remaining years of her life. Blanco's legacy, however, remains cemented in the annals of organized crime. Her story became a symbol of both the immense power of the drug trade and the incredible violence that often accompanies it. Blanco's name was frequently mentioned alongside the most infamous drug lords in history, and she became a subject of books, documentaries, and films. Griselda Blanco died on September 3, 2012, at the age of 69, when she was shot and killed in her hometown of Medellin, Colombia. Her death marked the end of an era for the Colombian drug trade. Blanco's rise to power, her violent methods, and her eventual fall from grace make her one of the most notorious figures in the history of organized crime. From a girl born in poverty to a drug queenpin, Blanco's story is a chilling reminder of the lengths to which some will go to achieve power, wealth, and control. Carlo Gambino, the quiet dawn of the American Mafia. Carlo Gambino remains one of the most iconic and influential figures in the history of organized crime in the United States. Known as the Quiet Dawn, Gambino's rise to power was marked by cunning, patience, and a deep understanding of the inner workings of the mafia. Unlike the more flamboyant mob bosses who attracted media attention, Gambino preferred to operate in the shadows, yet his influence was unmatched. His story begins in Sicily and stretches across decades, shaping the structure and culture of American organized crime. Carlo Gambino was born on August 24, 1902, in the town of Caccamo, located near Palermo in Sicily, Italy. He was born into a family with deep mafia ties. His relatives were part of the Sicilian Cosa Nostra, the criminal organization that had long held influence over the island's political and economic life. From an early age, Gambino was exposed to the strict codes of loyalty, secrecy, and honor that defined mafia life. These principles would become the foundation of his own criminal empire in the years to come. By the time he was in his teens, Gambino had already become involved in petty crime. In Sicily, where poverty was widespread and the mafia offered both protection and opportunity, many young men turned to organized crime as a way to survive and advance. At just 19 years old, Gambino immigrated to the United States under the guise of visiting family. He arrived in New York City in 1921 and quickly began to make connections within the Italian-American criminal underworld. Gambino settled in Brooklyn, where many other Sicilian immigrants had also established themselves. He soon aligned himself with Salvatore Toto d'Aquila, a powerful mafia boss in New York at the time. Gambino's quiet demeanor and strategic thinking earned him respect among older, more established mobsters. Even as a young man, he stood out for his ability to stay calm under pressure and to make decisions that benefited both himself and his organization. During the 1920s and 1930s, Gambino's power grew steadily. He became associated with Vincent Mangano, another major mafia figure, and worked within the Mangano crime family. It was during this time that the foundations of what would become the Gambino crime family were laid. Gambino's operations involved bootlegging during Prohibition, as well as illegal gambling, loan sharking, and labor racketeering. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Gambino avoided public attention and violent outbursts, preferring to work behind the scenes and eliminate threats quietly. One of the pivotal moments in Gambino's rise came in the early 1950s. Vincent Mangano disappeared in 1951, presumed murdered, and his brother Philip was found dead shortly after. It is widely believed that Gambino orchestrated their removal with the support of Albert Anastasia, a ruthless enforcer who took over the family. Gambino served as underboss to Anastasia and continued to strengthen his influence. However, he never stopped planning for the future. In 1957, Gambino made his move. Albert Anastasia was gunned down in a New York City barbershop, a murder that shocked the public and signaled a dramatic shift in mafia leadership. Though Gambino never admitted involvement, many believe he conspired with rival mobster Vito Genovese to remove Anastasia. After the killing, Gambino assumed control of the family, which would soon bear his name. As boss, Carlo Gambino transformed the organization into the most powerful and profitable crime family in the country. Under his leadership, the Gambino family expanded its reach into construction, trucking, labor unions, extortion, and high-level political connections. He forged strong alliances with other major crime families, including the Lucchese and Genovese families, forming a ruling body known as the Commission that would oversee mafia operations across the United States. Despite his immense power, Gambino managed to avoid significant legal trouble. He was arrested multiple times, but never convicted of serious charges. His careful planning, discretion, and use of intermediaries allowed him to insulate himself from direct involvement in criminal activities. Unlike bosses who flaunted their wealth or spoke freely, Gambino maintained a modest lifestyle and lived in a simple home in Brooklyn. His ability to lead without drawing attention became one of his greatest strengths. In the 1960s and 70s, the Gambino family controlled billions of dollars in illegal activity and Carlo Gambino was considered the most powerful mafia boss in America. He appointed trusted relatives and allies to key positions within the family, ensuring that his vision and structure would endure. His leadership style emphasized loyalty, stability, and low visibility, which contributed to the longevity of his reign. Carlo Gambino died of natural causes on October 15, 1976, at the age of 74. His death marked the end of an era in organized crime. Despite decades of criminal activity and FBI scrutiny, Gambino had managed to die a free man, never having spent a day in prison. His legacy lived on through the continued power of the Gambino family and the influence he had over the structure of the American mafia. Gambino's life was a masterclass in patience, strategy, and the subtle exercise of power. In a world where many mobsters lived fast and died young, Carlo Gambino built an empire that outlived him and shaped organized crime for generations to come. Tommaso Buscetta, the mafia's first major pentito. Tommaso Buscetta, once a loyal and high-ranking member of the Sicilian mafia, would go on to become the most significant informant in the history of organized crime. His revelations shook the foundations of the Cosa Nostra in both Italy and the United States, leading to hundreds of arrests and convictions. But before he became a household name in law enforcement and the media, Buscetta lived the life of a dedicated mafioso, born into a world of crime and secrecy that ultimately betrayed him. Tommaso Buscetta was born on July 13, 1928, in Palermo, Sicily, the youngest of 17 children in a poor family. Growing up in the Calza district, a tough neighborhood in Palermo, he was surrounded by poverty, limited opportunity, and the looming presence of the mafia. His father was a glassmaker, and the family struggled to make ends meet. Buscetta's early years were marked by hardship and a desire to escape the crushing weight of poverty. From a young age, Buscetta looked for ways to rise above his humble circumstances. By his early teens, he was already working in various trades, selling food on the streets, assisting craftsmen, and even dabbling in petty theft. But it was the allure of the mafia, with its promise of power, wealth, and respect, that ultimately captured his imagination. The organization was deeply woven into the fabric of Sicilian society, and for many young men like Buscetta, joining it seemed not only logical but necessary. He formally entered the ranks of the Sicilian Cosa Nostra in the late 1940s, aligning himself with the Porta Nuova clan in Palermo. He quickly earned a reputation for being resourceful and ambitious. By the 1950s, he was involved in cigarette smuggling, which was a lucrative business at the time and served as a stepping stone for many mafiosi into more serious criminal enterprises. Buscetta's ability to build alliances and navigate the politics of the mafia made him an asset to his superiors. As the years went on, Buscetta expanded his activities beyond Sicily. He traveled to Brazil, the United States, and other parts of the world, using international connections to help facilitate drug trafficking operations. By the 1960s, he was heavily involved in the heroin trade, acting as a liaison between Sicilian suppliers and American distributors. His international mobility and fluency in several languages set him apart from other mafiosi, allowing him to build a network that spanned continents. Despite his growing influence, Buscetta's life was marked by periods of instability. He was arrested multiple times in the 1960s and 1970s and served prison sentences in Italy, the U.S., and Brazil. Yet, each time he emerged from prison, he seemed to return to the mafia more entrenched than before. He saw himself as a man of honor, loyal to the old ways of the Cosa Nostra, those rooted in respect, discretion, and internal codes of conduct. However, by the late 1970s and early 1980s, the mafia in Sicily was undergoing a brutal transformation. The Corleonesi faction, led by Salvatore Riina, began a campaign of ruthless violence to seize control of the organization. Buscetta, who opposed the Corleonese's brutal tactics and their disregard for traditional mafia values, found himself increasingly marginalized and endangered. The Corleonesi viewed him as a threat, and he lost many friends and family members to their deadly purges. The breaking point came in the early 1980s, when two of Buschetta's sons, as well as several close associates, were murdered by Riena's faction. Devastated and disillusioned, Buschetta saw no future in continuing his life in the mafia. In 1983, while in Brazilian custody awaiting extradition to Italy, he made a fateful decision: he would talk. In 1984, once extradited to Italy, Buschetta began cooperating with Italian judge Giovanni Falcone. His decision to break omerta, the mafia's code of silence, was unprecedented. He became the first high-profile pentito, or mafia defector, providing detailed information about the inner workings of the Cosa Nostra. His testimony led to the historic Maxi trial in Palermo, which began in 1986 and resulted in the conviction of hundreds of mafiosi. Buschetta didn't just offer names, he explained the mafia's hierarchy, rituals, and rules. He described the commission or cupola, the governing body of the mafia, and exposed the connections between the Cosa Nostra and politicians, businessmen, and law enforcement. His revelations allowed prosecutors to understand the mafia not as a loose network of criminals, but as a highly structured criminal organization with deep roots in both Sicily and abroad. For his cooperation, Buschetta was placed in witness protection and relocated to the United States. He continued to testify in mafia trials throughout the 1980s and 1990s, including in the U.S., where his knowledge of international drug trafficking proved invaluable. Despite multiple threats to his life, Buschetta remained a key figure in the fight against organized crime. Tommaso Buschetta died of cancer on April 2, 2000, at the age of 71. Though once a devout mafioso, he became the mafia's greatest traitor, and, in the eyes of many, its most courageous whistleblower. His decision to break the silence cost him dearly, but it also helped bring justice to countless victims and reshape the global understanding of organized crime. Albert Anastasia, the Mad Hatter of the American Mafia. Albert Anastasia, one of the most feared and ruthless figures in the history of American organized crime, rose from humble beginnings to become a brutal enforcer and leader of the notorious Murder, Inc. Known for his violent temper and relentless ambition, Anastasia played a key role in shaping the American Mafia during its most violent era. His life, marked by power, bloodshed, and betrayal, remains one of the most chilling tales of underworld history. Albert Anastasia was born Umberto Anastasio on September 26, 1902, in the small coastal town of Tropea in Calabria, southern Italy. He was one of 9 children in a poor family. His father was a railway worker, and life in post-unification Italy offered few opportunities for advancement. The bleak economic conditions and limited prospects likely influenced Albert and his brothers to seek a better future elsewhere. In 1919, at the age of 17, Anastasia immigrated to the United States, entering the country through the port of New York. He settled in Brooklyn, where many Italian immigrants had formed tight-knit communities. Like many young immigrant men, Anastasia found work on the Brooklyn docks. Strong, aggressive, and ambitious, he quickly gained a reputation among the longshoremen for his physical strength and fierce temper. Anastasia's first brush with the law came soon after. In 1921, at just 19 years old, he was convicted of murdering a fellow dock worker during an argument. He was sentenced to death and sent to Sing Sing prison. However, due to a series of legal maneuvers, appeals, and mysteriously disappearing witnesses, his conviction was overturned in 1922, and he was released after serving only 2 years. This early escape from death would be the first of many brushes with the law that Anastasia would survive. After his release, Anastasia returned to the docks but also began building connections within the Italian-American underworld. He became closely associated with Joe the Boss Masseria and later aligned himself with Charles Lucky Luciano during the Mafia's internal war in the early 1930s. When Luciano and his allies orchestrated the assassination of Masseria and rival Salvatore Maranzano, Anastasia was a trusted triggerman and ally, playing a key role in the violent reshaping of the American Mafia. It was during this time that Anastasia emerged as one of the founding members of what would become known as Murder, Inc., a contract-killing organization that operated under the orders of the Mafia Commission. Led alongside Louis Lep Buckleter, Murder, Inc. was responsible for hundreds of assassinations across the country. Anastasia, known for his unpredictability and cold-blooded efficiency, earned the nickname the Mad Hatter for his willingness to kill without hesitation or remorse. Anastasia's loyalty and violent efficiency earned him a leadership role in the Mangano crime family, one of the 5 families of New York. For years, he served as underboss to Vincent Mangano, but the relationship was tense. Mangano resented Anastasia's independent dealings with powerful figures like Frank Costello and his close association with the Luciano later Genovese crime family. In 1951, both Vincent Mangano and his brother Philip disappeared. Vincent's body was never found, while Philip was discovered in a marsh. Anastasia was the prime suspect, but no charges were ever brought against him. Following the Mangano's disappearance, Anastasia took full control of the family with the Commission's approval, and the organization became known as the Anastasia crime family. As boss, he expanded the family's influence in labor unions, construction, and racketeering. Despite his power, Anastasia was reckless. He often acted without consulting other bosses, and his penchant for high-profile violence, including the brazen killing of a defector named Arnold Schuster in 1952, began to draw unwanted attention from law enforcement and rival mobsters alike. By the mid-1950s, tensions were brewing among the mafia's upper ranks. Vito Genovese, seeking to consolidate power and eliminate his rivals, viewed Anastasia as a liability. Together with Carlo Gambino, Anastasia's own underboss, Genovese orchestrated a plot to remove him. Gambino, ever calculating and patient, waited for the perfect opportunity to take over. On the morning of October 25, 1957, Anastasia entered the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan for a haircut and shave. While seated in the barber's chair, 2 masked gunmen entered and opened fire, riddling him with bullets. Anastasia's dramatic and public assassination shocked the nation. According to legend, in his final moments, he lunged at the attacker's reflections in the mirror before collapsing. His murder marked a turning point in the history of the Mafia. It paved the way for Carlo Gambino to take over the family, which would go on to become the most powerful of the 5 families. Anastasia's death also signaled the end of an era, one defined by open violence and personal vendettas, and the rise of a more businesslike, corporate mafia under men like Gambino and Genovese. Albert Anastasia's legacy is one of fear, chaos, and raw power. He helped shape the mafia into a national syndicate and played a central role in some of its darkest chapters. Though his reign was brief, his name remains synonymous with the brutal heart of organized crime. Raymond Patriarca, the quiet dawn of New England. Raymond Loretta Salvatore Patriarca was not as flamboyant or widely known as some of his contemporaries, but in the world of organized crime, few men wielded power with the quiet authority and ruthless efficiency that he did. For nearly 3 decades, Patriarca ruled over the New England Mafia with an iron grip, turning a regional crime family into one of the most disciplined and tightly controlled syndicates in America. His rise from humble immigrant roots to mafia kingpin is a tale of strategy, silence, and calculated violence. Raymond Patriarca was born on March 17, 1908, in Worcester, Massachusetts, to Italian immigrant parents from Sicily. His family later moved to Providence, Rhode Island, where he would spend most of his life. Like many children of immigrant families, young Raymond grew up in a working-class neighborhood filled with opportunity and danger. His father worked hard to support the family, but the Patriarca household was no stranger to poverty. From an early age, Raymond displayed a sharp mind and an intense demeanor. He had a reputation as a serious, no-nonsense young man who preferred results over words. He dropped out of school at an early age and began taking odd jobs to help support his family. But by his teenage years, he had begun gravitating toward the street life. The local Italian-American underworld offered both income and respect, two things Raymond craved. By the 1920s, he was already involved in various criminal activities, including robbery, bootlegging, and extortion. During Prohibition, like many aspiring gangsters, Patriarca took advantage of the booming black market in illegal alcohol. He built valuable relationships with more established criminals, laying the foundation for his future ascent. In 1938, Patriarca was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 5 years in prison. This stint behind bars proved to be a pivotal moment in his life. Not only did it harden him, but it also helped him forge deeper ties with other organized crime figures. Upon his release, he returned to Rhode Island more determined than ever to rise through the ranks of the underworld. By the 1940s, Patriarca had become a trusted figure in the New England Mafia, then under the control of boss Philip Bucola. Bucola, facing increasing pressure from law enforcement and preferring a quieter life, decided to retire and return to Italy. In 1954, he named Raymond Patriarca as his successor, a move that would change the landscape of organized crime in the region. Patriarca relocated the family's headquarters from Boston to Providence, operating out of a nondescript storefront called the National Cigarette Service Company on Etwells Avenue. From this humble building, he would run a criminal empire that extended from Rhode Island and Massachusetts to Maine and Connecticut. His leadership style was markedly different from other bosses. He valued loyalty, efficiency, and discretion. He had no tolerance for reckless behavior or unnecessary attention, and those who crossed him often met swift and brutal consequences. Under Patriarca's rule, the New England Mafia flourished. He oversaw illegal gambling, loan sharking, extortion, narcotics trafficking, and labor racketeering. He maintained tight control over his territory and demanded tribute from anyone who wanted to operate within his domain. Unlike some mobsters who enjoyed the spotlight, Patriarca kept a low profile, rarely speaking to the press and avoiding flashy displays of wealth. What made Patriarca especially formidable was his ability to enforce discipline within his ranks. He was feared, respected, and above all, obeyed. Meetings were brief, phone calls were avoided, and any hint of disloyalty was dealt with immediately. His secret to longevity in a world filled with betrayal was simple. He minimized exposure and maximized fear. Despite his careful nature, Patriarca was not invincible. In 1969, he was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder after being caught on a wiretap ordering a hit. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Even behind bars, however, he continued to run the family through loyal intermediaries. His authority remained unquestioned, and his grip on power never truly loosened. Raymond Patriarca was released from prison in 1975 and resumed his role as boss. Though aging and suffering from health problems, he remained active in family affairs until his death. On July 11, 1984, he died of a heart attack at the age of 76 while attending a meeting at a Providence social club. His death marked the end of an era. The Patriarca crime family would continue under his son, Raymond Jr., but it would never again achieve the same level of cohesion and dominance. Raymond Patriarca's legacy lives on as one of the most quietly effective mafia bosses in American history. He built a dynasty not through noise, but through control, fear, and an unshakable command of the underworld. Sam Giancana, the mobster with political ties. Sam Giancana, a name that evokes images of Chicago's dark underworld and whispers of political intrigue, was one of the most enigmatic and powerful figures in American organized crime. As the boss of the Chicago outfit during the 1950s and 60s, Giancana wasn't just a feared mobster. He was a man whose reach extended beyond the streets and into the halls of politics and even international affairs. His rise from a troubled youth in Chicago's Italian neighborhoods to a reputed mafia kingpin is a tale steeped in violence, ambition, and shadowy influence. Salvatore Giancana was born on June 15, 1908, in Chicago, Illinois, to Sicilian immigrants. His father, a strict and hardworking man, operated a pushcart in the Little Italy neighborhood known as the Patch. Young Salvatore, later nicknamed Mooney because of his unpredictable behavior, had a rough upbringing. His mother died when he was a child, and he clashed frequently with his father. Disinterested in school and drawn to the excitement of the streets, Giancana gravitated toward petty crime early in life. By the age of 17, Giancana was already involved with the 42 Gang, a notoriously violent youth gang in Chicago that served as a training ground for future mobsters. Known for hijackings, theft, and murder, the 42 Gang attracted attention from older, more established members of the Chicago outfit. Giancana's ruthlessness and street smarts made him stand out. His first brush with serious legal trouble came in 1925, when he was arrested for auto theft. Over the next few years, he built a rap sheet that included burglary, assault, and murder charges, many of which mysteriously disappeared or ended in dropped cases, thanks to mob influence. Giancana eventually caught the eye of Al Capone's organization, the Chicago Outfit. In the 1930s and 40s, he worked under the legendary outfit boss Paul, the waiter Rica, and later Tony Accardo. He specialized in enforcing street-level operations, overseeing illegal gambling, extortion, and bootlegging. His work in controlling African-American policy gambling rackets on Chicago's South Side proved particularly profitable and expanded the outfit's reach in minority communities. By the early 1950s, Giancana had earned a reputation as a reliable enforcer and a man who got things done without hesitation. His loyalty and effectiveness led to his rise through the ranks, and in 1957, with Accardo stepping back from day-to-day operations, Giancana took over as boss of the Chicago outfit. Though Accardo remained the ultimate authority, Giancana became the face of the outfit's operations during its most politically charged era. As boss, Giancana oversaw a sprawling criminal empire that included gambling, prostitution, narcotics, and loan sharking, not just in Chicago, but across the U.S. and into Latin America. Under his leadership, the outfit expanded its Las Vegas casino interests and developed international connections, particularly in Mexico and Cuba. Giancana was flamboyant and enjoyed the trappings of power, fine suits, flashy cars, and beautiful women. He also cultivated friendships with celebrities, including Frank Sinatra and members of the Rat Pack, which added to his mystique. But what truly set Giancana apart from other mobsters was his rumored connection to American politics. In the late 1950s and early 60s, he was allegedly involved in covert operations with the CIA, including plots to assassinate Cuban leader Fidel Castro. Declassified documents and testimonies have linked Giancana and the mob to CIA attempts to use underworld channels to carry out hits on Castro in exchange for regaining their lost casino interests in Cuba after the revolution. Perhaps even more tantalizing are the persistent rumors of Giancana's involvement in the 1960 U.S. presidential election. It has long been alleged that the Chicago outfit used its influence to swing Illinois in favor of John F. Kennedy, securing his razor-thin victory over Richard Nixon. Adding fuel to the speculation was Giancana's relationship with Judith Campbell Exner, who was also romantically linked to JFK. Whether or not Giacomo had real influence over the Kennedy administration, the connection brought him both prestige and intense scrutiny from federal authorities. Giancana's high profile eventually made him a liability. His flamboyance drew attention that more conservative mob leaders disliked. In 1965, amid growing pressure from law enforcement and discontent among other outfit members, Giacomo was forced into exile in Mexico, allegedly with CIA assistance. He lived there for nearly a decade but was eventually deported back to the United States in 1974. Upon his return, Giacomo was subpoenaed to testify before a federal grand jury investigating CIA mafia connections. But before he could speak, he was murdered in his Oak Park, Illinois home on June 19, 1975. He was shot multiple times while cooking sausage in his basement kitchen, an execution-style hit that suggested betrayal from someone close. Sam Giancana's legacy is a murky blend of crime, politics, and conspiracy. He was a man who thrived in the shadows, manipulating events on a scale far beyond the typical mob boss. His life remains a symbol of the deep entanglements between organized crime, intelligence agencies, and the corridors of American power. Samian Mogilevich, the shadowy brain of global organized crime. Samian Yudkovich Mogilevich, often dubbed the Brainy Don or the most dangerous mobster in the world, rose from humble beginnings in the Soviet Union to become one of the most elusive and powerful figures in international organized crime. Unlike traditional mobsters known for brute force and street-level violence, Mogilevich operated behind the scenes, using his deep understanding of economics, politics, and finance to build a transnational criminal empire with operations spanning continents. Born on June 30, 1946, in Kiev, Ukraine, then part of the Soviet Union, Semyon Mogilevich grew up in a working-class Jewish family. Life under the Soviet regime was hard, especially for ethnic minorities like Jews, who often faced systemic discrimination. Mogilevich was known to be intelligent and calculating even as a young boy. He pursued higher education and eventually earned a degree in economics from Lviv University. This academic background would later prove instrumental in his unique style of organized crime. In the 1970s and early 80s, Mogilevich became involved in the Soviet black market, particularly in schemes targeting fellow Jews attempting to emigrate from the USSR. He reportedly offered to help immigrants convert their rubles into foreign currency or sell their Soviet assets, only to swindle them out of their savings. These early scams helped Mogilevich accumulate his initial fortune and connections within criminal and intelligence circles. As the Soviet Union began to unravel in the late 1980s, Mogilevich seized the opportunity to expand. The collapse of the USSR created a lawless environment and a massive opening for those willing to exploit the chaos. Mogilevich began forging alliances with Russian and Ukrainian criminal groups, buying state assets on the cheap, and investing in banks, factories, and even military surplus. His network grew rapidly, with operations branching into arms trafficking, drug smuggling, money laundering, tax fraud, and more. In the 1990s, Mogilevich moved to Budapest, Hungary, establishing a home base in Europe where he could expand his empire without the intense scrutiny of Russian or American law enforcement. From Hungary, he operated with impunity, utilizing shell companies, offshore accounts, and corrupt officials to build an untouchable web of influence. He also acquired Hungarian citizenship through marriage, giving him legal protections that made extradition difficult. Mogilevich's power lay not just in traditional criminal enterprises, but in his control over complex financial operations. He was known to run sophisticated money laundering schemes that moved billions of dollars through banks in Eastern Europe, the Caribbean, and the United States. One of the most infamous operations tied to Mogilevich was the so-called YBM Magnex scandal in the mid-1990s. YBM Magnex was a Pennsylvania-based company that claimed to manufacture industrial magnets. On the surface, it appeared legitimate and was even publicly traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange. But behind the scenes, the company was a front for Mogilevic's money laundering activities. With inflated profits and fake contracts, the company duped investors and laundered millions in illicit funds. In 1998, the FBI raided YBM's headquarters, and trading on its stock was frozen. The scandal sent shockwaves through the financial world and brought Mogilevic's name into the spotlight for Western authorities. Despite increased attention, Mogilevich remained elusive. He was known for maintaining a low profile, rarely appearing in public, and using intermediaries to conduct business. His connections were vast and extended into legitimate businesses and political circles. Allegations have tied him to the Russian FSB, suggesting he operated with the tacit approval or even collaboration of state security services. In 2003, Russian authorities arrested Mogilevich on tax evasion charges, but he was released a year later. Since then, he has largely remained in Russia, reportedly living openly in Moscow under government protection. His name continued to appear in connection with various financial crimes and intelligence operations, but legal actions against him stalled. In 2009, the FBI added him to its 10 most wanted fugitives list, citing his involvement in fraud and racketeering related to the YBM Magnex case. However, they acknowledged that his safe haven in Russia made arrest and extradition nearly impossible. What makes Semyon Mogilevich unique among gangsters is not just the scale of his operations, but the sophistication. He is fluent in multiple languages, holds degrees in economics, and is reputed to possess an IQ well above average. His approach to organized crime mirrors that of a corporate CEO or a covert intelligence officer, relying more on strategy, manipulation, and networks than brute force. Today, Mogilevich remains a symbol of the murky overlap between organized crime, global finance, and political power. Though his exact influence is difficult to quantify, his legacy is clear. He redefined what a mob boss could be, not just a thug in the shadows, but a financier of crime on a global scale. Rafael Caro Quintero, the narco who shaped Mexico's drug war. Rafael Caro Quintero is one of the most notorious figures in the history of Mexican drug trafficking. A founding member of the Guadalajara cartel, his name became internationally infamous in the 1980s after the brutal murder of a U.S. DEA agent. Caro Quintero's rise from rural poverty to a position of immense power in the drug underworld is a story marked by ambition, brutality, and a lasting impact on Mexico's organized crime landscape. Caro Quintero was born on October 3, 1952, in La Noria, a small, impoverished village in Barrio Guado, Sinaloa, the same mountainous region that would later produce other infamous drug lords like Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Raised in a poor farming family, Caro Quintero was the oldest of 12 siblings. His father died when he was young, forcing him to grow up quickly and help provide for the family. He left school early and worked as a field laborer to make ends meet. During his teenage years, Caro Quintero began to see opportunities beyond legitimate agriculture. Like many in the rugged terrain of Sinaloa, he was drawn into the drug trade, which had already taken root in the region through the cultivation of marijuana and opium poppies. He started by working as a driver and errand boy for local traffickers, but his intelligence, ruthlessness, and ambition quickly set him apart. Before long, he had established his own drug operations, growing marijuana in remote plantations deep in the Sierra Madre Mountains. By the late 1970s, Caro Quintero had become a rising star in the Mexican drug world. He formed an alliance with two other powerful figures, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo. Together, they founded the Guadalajara cartel, which would go on to become one of the first major Mexican drug trafficking organizations to dominate the international narcotics trade. The cartel became known for its efficient smuggling routes that moved vast quantities of marijuana and cocaine from Mexico into the United States, earning millions of dollars in the process. Caro Quintero played a critical role in this operation. He was known for organizing some of the largest marijuana plantations ever discovered, including a massive site known as Rancho El Bufalo in the state of Chihuahua. This 2,500-acre plantation was discovered in 1984 and valued at an estimated $8 billion. It was protected by armed guards, workers, and allegedly corrupt officials, showcasing the cartel's deep reach and influence. However, the Guadalajara cartel's success brought it into direct conflict with U.S. authorities, particularly the Drug Enforcement Administration (DEA). At the forefront of that fight was DEA agent Enrique "Kiki" Camarena, who was stationed in Guadalajara and had begun investigating the cartel's operations. Camarena gathered intelligence on El Bufalo and other cartel assets, helping orchestrate the eventual destruction of the plantation. Caro Quintero blamed Camarena for this costly loss and, along with cartel leaders, orchestrated his kidnapping and murder in 1985. Camarena was abducted in broad daylight, tortured for over 30 hours, and killed. The murder shocked both the U.S. and Mexico and set off a massive international manhunt. Under pressure from the United States, Mexican authorities arrested Caro Quintero later that year in Costa Rica, where he had fled. He was extradited back to Mexico and sentenced to 40 years in prison for his role in the murder, drug trafficking, and other crimes. His capture marked a turning point in U.S.-Mexico drug enforcement cooperation and signaled the beginning of a prolonged war against Mexican cartels. Caro Quintero served 28 years in prison, but was controversially released in 2013 by a Mexican judge who ruled he had been improperly tried in a federal court for a state-level offense. The decision sparked outrage in the U.S., and the Mexican Supreme Court quickly reversed the ruling. However, by the time an arrest warrant was reissued, Caro Quintero had already gone into hiding. Following his release, Caro Quintero reportedly resumed drug trafficking activities and attempted to regain influence within the evolving cartel landscape, particularly as rival factions vied for power. In 2018, the FBI placed him on its 10 most wanted fugitives list, offering a $20 million reward for information leading to his capture, the highest ever offered for a drug trafficker at the time. Caro Quintero was finally recaptured on July 15, 2022, by Mexican authorities in the state of Sinaloa. His arrest came after years of covert surveillance and pressure from the United States, which continues to seek his extradition to face charges related to Camarena's murder and ongoing drug offenses. Rafael Caro Quintero remains a symbol of the early days of Mexican drug cartels, when corruption, violence, and impunity allowed traffickers to grow unchecked. His legacy is a reminder of how one man, armed with determination and few scruples, can help reshape a nation's criminal landscape for decades. Kazuo Tauka, the godfather of the Yakuza. Kazuo Tauka, often referred to as the godfather of the Yakuza, was one of the most powerful and influential crime bosses in modern Japanese history. As the long-reigning leader of the Yamaguchi-gumi, the largest and most feared Yakuza syndicate, Tauka transformed a regional gang into a nationwide criminal empire. His story is one of resilience, cunning, and a brutal code of discipline that made him both respected and feared throughout Japan. Kazuo Tauka was born on March 28, 1913, in the small fishing village of Kure in Hiroshima Prefecture. Orphaned at a young age, Tauka grew up in poverty, without the support or stability of a family. His rough upbringing forced him to fend for himself early on, and he quickly became familiar with the streets. With little formal education and limited opportunities, he drifted toward the criminal underworld as a means of survival. As a teenager, Tauca became involved with local street gangs and began making a name for himself as a fearless and capable fighter. His demeanor was quiet, but his actions were ruthless. He quickly climbed the ranks of the local underworld, earning the respect of his peers and the attention of more established crime figures. In the 1930s, he joined the Yamaguchi Gumi, a Kobe-based group initially formed as a labor union for dock workers but increasingly engaged in illegal activity. Under the leadership of Noboru Yamaguchi, the syndicate focused on protection rackets and labor disputes at Kobe's busy ports. Tauca, however, envisioned something far greater. After proving his loyalty and capability through various assignments, including violent enforcement, mediation between rival groups, and revenue generation, he rose quickly within the ranks. By 1946, after the death of the second boss, Tauca was named Kumicho, or boss, of the Yamaguchi Gumi. He was only 33 years old. Once in power, Kazuo Tauca began an ambitious and calculated expansion of the organization. He believed in running the Yamaguchi Gumi like a corporation, with a strict hierarchy, internal discipline, and strategic alliances. He extended the gang's reach beyond Kobe, bringing under its umbrella various smaller gangs from around the Kansai region and eventually all across Japan. Through negotiations, coercion, and often outright violence, Tauca consolidated power and eliminated rivals. Tauca's version of the Yakuza upheld traditional codes of loyalty and obedience, but he also brought a modern sensibility to the syndicate. He diversified the organization's criminal portfolio to include gambling, loan sharking, drug trafficking, and control over entertainment and nightlife districts. Under his leadership, the Yamaguchi Gumi became deeply involved in legitimate businesses, real estate, construction, and political lobbying, blurring the lines between crime and commerce. What set Tauca apart was not just his leadership skills, but his image. Known as the Kuma, or bear because of his large frame and intimidating presence, he maintained an air of authority wherever he went. Though he lost a pinky finger in a knife fight, a mark of both Yakuza discipline and his violent past, he was always impeccably dressed and known for his charisma in both underworld and public circles. He even appeared in films, reinforcing his mythic status. Despite his criminal reputation, Tauca maintained relationships with police, politicians, and business leaders, using bribery, favors, and back-channel diplomacy to protect and grow his empire. His influence was such that during times of major public disorder, like natural disasters or riots, the Yamaguchi Gumi under Tauca sometimes provided relief and aid faster than the government, further cementing their image as a shadow institution in Japanese society. His reign, however, was not without challenges. The 1970s and early 1980s brought internal strife, police crackdowns, and external threats from rival gangs. Tauca responded with characteristic resolve, purging disloyal members, strengthening his core leadership, and negotiating temporary truces with competing syndicates. His leadership ensured the Yamaguchi Gumi's dominance during Japan's post-war economic boom. Kazuo Tauca's health began to decline in the early 1980s. In 1981, he suffered a heart attack and died on July 23 of that year at the age of 68. His death marked the end of an era. The Yamaguchi Gumi faced internal power struggles in the years that followed, but Tauca's organizational blueprint and iron rule left an enduring legacy. Kazuo Tauca is remembered as the architect of modern Yakuza power. He turned a mid-sized criminal group into a national syndicate with tens of thousands of members, operating at the intersection of fear, respect, and influence. His name still commands attention, and his impact on Japanese organized crime is unmatched. Dutch Schultz, the violent prohibition bootlegger. Dutch Schultz, born Arthur Flegenheimer on August 6, 1902, in the Bronx, New York, became one of the most infamous gangsters of the early 20th century. Known for his violent temperament and ruthless ambition, Schultz was a notorious figure during Prohibition, a period when organized crime thrived due to the illegal alcohol trade. His rise to power was marked by his defiance of traditional mob etiquette and his ambition to control the city's underworld, ultimately leading to his violent and mysterious demise. Arthur Flegenheimer grew up in a poor Jewish family in the Bronx. His father, a tailor, struggled to make ends meet, and young Arthur, like many of his peers, found himself drawn to the rough streets of New York City. His early life was filled with crime, starting with petty thefts and later moving on to more serious offenses. He was known to have a quick temper and a knack for fighting, skills that would later serve him well in the criminal world. As a teenager, Flegenheimer's criminal activities escalated. He adopted the nickname Dutch due to his Dutch-German ancestry, and eventually Dutch Schultz became the moniker by which he was known in the underworld. He began working for small-time criminals, gradually getting involved with bootlegging and other illegal activities. During the early days of Prohibition, when the 18th Amendment banned the sale of alcohol in the United States, Dutch saw an opportunity to make a name for himself in the lucrative bootlegging trade. In the 1920s, Schultz aligned himself with various criminal figures, including members of the Harlem-based gang, the Shapiro brothers. However, it was his connection with Lucky Luciano and other members of the Genovese family that helped him expand his operations. Schultz's main business was bootlegging, smuggling alcohol into New York City and distributing it to speakeasies, restaurants, and other illegal establishments. He also became involved in a variety of other illicit ventures, including extortion, loan sharking, and gambling. What made Schultz stand out among other gangsters was his violent and unpredictable nature. He was known to be hot-headed and willing to resort to extreme measures to achieve his goals. He built his empire through intimidation, making brutal moves to silence rivals and expand his reach. Schultz's violence was not limited to his enemies. He was also known to have a strained relationship with his own associates. He would often dispose of anyone he felt betrayed him, and his temper made him a feared and unpredictable figure in the criminal world. Despite his violent ways, Schultz's success in bootlegging and his ability to evade the law made him a prominent figure in New York's criminal landscape. By the early 1930s, Schultz had become one of the richest and most powerful mobsters in the country, controlling vast bootlegging operations and having a stake in several illegal gambling rackets. He even expanded his business into the construction industry, where he used his influence to extort money from contractors and unions. However, Schultz's rise to power was not without its challenges. His volatility made him many enemies, and his disregard for traditional mob rules and structure alienated some of his most important allies. In 1935, Schultz's ambition led him to a dangerous confrontation with Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano, two powerful figures in the national crime syndicate. Schultz's attempt to gain control over the numbers racket, an illegal gambling operation, led to tensions with other mob leaders who felt he was overstepping his bounds. In response to Schultz's growing power, a decision was made to have him eliminated. On October 23, 1935, Schultz was shot in a hit orchestrated by the Mafia Commission. He was dining at the Chateau Madrid, a nightclub in Newark, New Jersey, when a group of hitmen opened fire on him. Schultz, despite being mortally wounded, managed to stagger out of the restaurant but collapsed outside. He died shortly afterward in the hospital, his body riddled with bullets. His death was the result of a long-running dispute with fellow mobsters, culminating in a deadly betrayal by those he had once considered allies. Dutch Schultz's death marked the end of his reign as one of the most feared criminals of his time. His life and violent death became the stuff of legend, and his story remains a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition, violence, and defiance of the mob's code. Today, Dutch Schultz is remembered as a ruthless and unpredictable figure who carved out an empire in the criminal underworld, only to be brought down by the very system of organized crime that he sought to control.